The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
This is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
it might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the Sports Guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. A sunny day here in Southern California. Not sunny for me. Not a happy day. The Celtics have been eliminated after a hard-fought 5-game series in which just about everything went wrong. On the Subway Fresh Take Hotline right now, the radio voice of the Boston Celtics, Sean Grande. What's happening?
Have you noticed that you begin every day by saying it's a sunny day in Los Angeles? I think we get it. I think we understand why you moved out there and why you live there. Steve Martin did that movie, L.A. Story, a few years ago, and he played a weatherman, and the gimmick was he just put sunny 72 and he'd tape it for several days ahead because there was never a change.
I can't think of another way to open it, so unless somebody comes up with a better idea, for now, that's the podcast opening. Walk me through the bus and the team playing last night after a 5-game loss against Miami that, man, if like two plays go differently, it's 3-2 going back to Boston.
Yeah, different from a year ago in L.A., which is when I eventually write my book or whatever will replace books in 20 years. You know, you just think it and it comes out somehow on the Internet. It'll be a big chapter about the game after L.A. and the day after and the flight back. But last night there was obviously a ton of frustration because you realized, because of Game 4, I think there was that sense going in. The Celtics thought they were going to win the championship, certainly last year, going out to L.A. The feeling going into Game 5 and a couple of days beforehand was confident in the ability to beat Miami, but that knowledge of knowing how the NBA works and knowing history, that fourth game was the game you really had to have if you were going to win a series. And so many opportunities to get it, and there were those similar opportunities again. But as it played out and the way it played out and the way we'll always remember it, there was I think a little more peace in the knowledge that given this situation, and you could not ask for a greater contrast than two of the 5 best players in the world, maybe the 2 best right now as we're talking today, doing their thing in the fourth quarter on the big stage while 2 Celtic starters were lying on their back in a mash unit in front of the bench. And there's that acceptance that there was not a circumstance the Celtics didn't have the health to beat Miami in this series. And in contrast to the Spurs and the Lakers, that the Celtics really did go out like champions last night.
Well, what about the irony of the youngest and healthiest of the big 4 being the one who got hurt?
Yeah, all of it. There's a ton of those ironies. You know, Kendrick Perkins and Tony Allen still playing remarkably as the Celtics season is over. Shaq, the man whom was the centerpiece of the decision to make that trade, that happening. We're talking today, and last year we spoke after Game 5, LeBron's Game 5 against the Celtics, and think about what a difference a year makes there. And there's a ton of it, and you know, you wrote 1,000 pages on it, on the NBA and its history, and you know when you're in those sort of transcendent moments, and that certainly was one last night.
You think for LeBron that was a transcendent moment? I
do. I really do. And the thing about it is the realization that today you can find every angle to come at LeBron. The apology to Cleveland, the fact that Skip Bayless resting his case that he's not Michael Jordan because, of course, he had to have somebody else. The great full circle of the fact that it was the Celtics who set this path in motion in the NBA of having stars play together, and it being knowing that he needed to play with a guy like Dwayne Wade to get past the Celtics finally. There's a ton of that, but I do think that for all the negative stuff you want to say about LeBron, and people always will, from the moment he stepped on the floor, his first game in Sacramento 8 years ago, nobody has ever had to walk the footsteps that he has had to walk with the scrutiny and the pressure from the first day, going through what he went through last year, and that is a weight that he's carried with him, and he was tremendous in the clutch. Of course, Miami doesn't win that series without Wade. He was the MVP of the series. But it's a day that the celebration last night, there were people who thought it was excessive. I didn't, because if you followed this story, this LeBron story for 8 years, that was his night, and he earned it.
I thought Wade, I tweeted this last night, had one of the best playoff series of all time, because not only did he play spectacularly on both ends, and I have no idea how he had the energy to chase Ray Allen around on screens and then do what he did offensively, but goated Pierce into getting kicked out of Game 1. And I don't know how intentional it was. It was definitely not the cleanest play that's ever happened in basketball history, but he was responsible for Rondo being maimed in Game 3. And added together, it was quite a series.
He's spectacular, and there was some discussion, and I talked to a lot of people. I take probably those MVP and first-team All-Star votes a little more seriously than most people do. And I remember talking to a lot of people beforehand as I was doing my ballot, because I kind of had the sense that Kobe was probably going to end up on that first team.
Which is a farce.
Which is ridiculous. And again, Kobe to me still could have been. It wouldn't have shocked me had he become the best player in the playoffs again, because Kobe is what he is. But I don't think people truly appreciated how good a year Dwayne Wade had. And there's that thing throughout history, go throughout baseball, all the other sports where teams with two great players get hurt in the MVP voting. I always think of the 1986 Mets, who were one of the best teams of all time, and they had Keith Hernandez and Gary Carter, who both had MVP years, but neither one came close because they were going to split the votes. And it's tough when you have LeBron and Dwayne Wade, and it's a year that Derrick Rose is going to win anyway, so that didn't matter. But Dwayne Wade was clearly on that first team. They are two of the best 5 players in the world, and you don't get to the Eastern Conference Finals with the supporting cast or lack thereof that they have if they aren't as good as we think they are. And, it was a spectacular show. And you think the Celtics survived LeBron in 2008, 2010, despite that saying that the team with the best player always wins the series. Well, that comes to an end when the team has the best 2 players in the series. There's virtually no way you're going to win, especially when you are as banged up as the Celtics were by the end.
But by the same token, let's say Rondo doesn't get hurt in Game 3.
Yeah, it's probably a 7-game series.
It goes 7. Yeah. And the Celtics probably lose Game 7 unless it's one of those Ray Allen 9 3-pointer games, or unless Pierce has one of those Game 7 2008 against Cleveland games.
There's only one better thing for the NBA, for all of us to get sucked into this history and over-dramatizing things, as certainly I like to do. It would have been better from a storyline standpoint, from a history standpoint, from all of it, had that been Game 7 last night,
right,
and not Game 5. But again, the Celtics was what they were. You were not expecting them to compete with the 2 best players in the world, with Delonte West and the not Kristich on the floor, and the lineup that they had by the end. It was not the plan, and it's, again, a shame it didn't go 7. But that was the Celtics went out like champions, but that was a championship close by a Miami team that suddenly, even with the 2.5 guys, and maybe we'll get to Chris Bosh later, because let's not forget, he was going head-to-head against still 16 years in, one of the premier defensive players in the NBA and the best defensive player of his generation. And don't be surprised if you see Chris Bosh sort of, shaking that second bat in the on-deck circle when he gets to the next round, even though he struggled against Chicago. So for all the criticism of Chris Bosh, most of it deserved. Let's not forget who he was going against. That, you look at Miami and you say, why not? Even with that supporting cast, that's how good those 2.5/3 guys are.
All right, my counter to everything you just said. I thought in Game 4 and Game 5, Miami made a lot of bad shots. Mm-hmm. They're shots that I wanted them to take. They're shots that LeBron made, the 3 when they were down 84-81 in Game 4.
Killer.
He takes a bad 3 off balance. He's a 28% three-point shooter, I think, in the postseason. For career, he's 30%. And really, when he's not set, they usually don't go in for him. That one went in. The 2 at the end of Game 5, Wade made a couple ridiculous shots in Game 4, Game 5. I'm not saying they were flukes. I'm just saying they made a lot of tough shots. I didn't feel like those were easy shots Miami was making. In that next round, if you're relying on 20-footers and 24-footers, at some point you got to have a plan B. I just don't see them making those for 8 more wins.
And Chicago's defense will have to be as good as the Celtics defense was, and the Celtics defense was very good in the series, and that's just the point. the Miami team with those three guys is tough to guard anyway. But if LeBron and Dwayne Wade are hitting jump shots,
right,
forget it. And they were. And LeBron has shot threes horrendously against the Celtics and against most teams, but especially against the Celtics, the way they defend over the years. It was a big part of this conversation we had 1 year ago today, after Game 5, when the Celtics were forcing him to take jump shots, and he wasn't making them. That this is what the Celtics' game plan was. But, what are you going to do when LeBron conjures up a 5 3-pointer game, with that season on the line, knowing full well that there was a, 3-1 or not, because of the circumstances, Eric Spoelstra, who gets no respect and no love and no attention from anybody, and I'm happy for him. I think he's a really good coach, and he's been through a lot too. Everybody knew they couldn't go back to Boston. They could not go back to Boston for a sixth game, because this thing would really start to steamroll if it had gone to 6 or maybe 7. So that's why, it was a championship close. And they have to get to the basket more, and they can't settle for jump shots, but they got the free throw disparity that they wanted throughout the series. They'll get it again.
Yeah, but that had nothing to do with anything other than that was ridiculous. I watched that game as closely as I can watch a basketball game, and I have no idea how they shot twice as many free throws. Or how 2 travelings got called in Game 5 when LeBron, at the end of Game 4 in the final minute, took 4 steps on one of the biggest plays of the game. It's just
travel call. The Big Baby one, and even the Paul Pierce one, but the Big Baby one is one of those ones that, from the naked eye, it kind of looks like traveling, the way he's stumbling, and then you watch the replay and you realize it wasn't. And the Paul Pierce one was probably the same way. But I don't think. Listen, it's an easy thing to do. We tend to stay away because we have one of the legendary, iconic figures in NBA history, Tommy Heinsohn, in our broadcast group in Boston. On our side of it, we tend to try to stay away from the officiating as much as possible. And I don't think, for all the calls that were made, and of course there's always going to be calls to look at, I think it's one of the nice things as a Celtic fan today. You can't really say, well, the Celtics didn't advance because of the officials.
Yeah, that's fair. I put it this way, Miami in the next round does not have home court, and they are not in a deciding game going to get the calls that they did yesterday.
Yeah, Oprah. It turns out Oprah has home court.
Oprah has home court, and Obama.
That's right.
Don't forget that part.
And in the hockey Toy Story on Ice has home ice.
Let's turn our attention to the most awkward part of this podcast: the fact that Doc Rivers botched games 4 and 5. First of all, I thought it became very clear about 2.5 quarters into Game 4 that Miami had figured out every single thing that Rajon Rondo could do and couldn't do.
Yeah.
And from that point on, we were playing 4 on 5 offensively. And it was just clear that Delonte should have been playing over Rondo, and loyalty, stubbornness, whatever, they kept Rondo out there, and he really hurt the team in that fourth quarter. What was your take as you were watching that transpire live?
Well, the first thought was, once Miami had figured out Rondo, the first thought was, how on earth are the Celtics going to score without Rondo if he really is as banged up as it turns out he was? And we saw what happened to the Celtics offense in Game 5 when you completely take Rondo out of the picture. It's a 16-0 run that ends the game with some horrendous turnovers down the stretch of Game 5. I think, as you say, that was probably the biggest turning point of the series was the Rondo injury, because the Celtics needed everybody at 100% to compete with Miami, all their key players anyway. You saw what happened when Paul Pierce was 80% in Game 2. Suddenly he was you have to be at 100% if you're Pierce against LeBron, Garnett against Bosh. Rondo had to dominate his position.
Also the slash and kick thing he'd kind of figured out as the series went along. That's the way to beat Miami, and that's why I think, hey, there's my phone. That's why I think Derrick Rose is going to have so much trouble, or going to give them so much trouble in the next round, is because Miami doesn't have a lot of size. They do kind of overcommit when they're trying to jump the passing lanes, all that stuff. There are these little loopholes to get into the lane and then kick it back out, and that really hurt the Celtics. And then Rondo's rebounding. You forget, like in games like that where Miami, I think, what was it in Game 4, 17 rebound differential?
Yep.
And taking Rondo with Rondo's one arm, you're removing one of the best rebounders the Celtics have.
And in Game 4, and the reason, as we always going back to that thing I was saying earlier about the best player in a playoff series wins, one of the primary reasons the Celtics beat Cleveland a year ago in that second round series was because yeah, the team with the best player did win, and it was Rondo. Rondo was the best player in that series because he was active. And everyone looks at assists, and that's a sexy number, and when he scores and triple-doubles and things like that. But you look at two numbers for Rondo, and those will be the indicator of not only his success, but usually the Celtics' success as a result. One is the rebounding number, but the bigger one is free throw attempts. I was asked before the playoffs, to make predictions. And if you have a job like mine, you don't want to go out of your way to say, well, the Celtics aren't going to win. I really didn't think the Celtics would win this year. I didn't think they would get by Miami, but I found a way to hedge it. I thought if Shaq and Rondo could get to the free throw line 10 times a game between them, that the Celtics had an excellent chance to pull this off, to get back to the finals and certainly win it, because the Lakers looked vulnerable down the stretch, and obviously it didn't come close to happen. That was the same way of saying a few years ago that the Celtics absolutely will make the playoffs if Paul Pierce, Wally Szczerbiak, and Theo Ratliff stay healthy all year.
Well, I would be Rondo injury aside, the Celtics lost the series in the first two games because it's just too hard to win a 7-game series when you blow the first two, and they played like crap in both games. And at that point, Rondo was healthy, and
has a chance to win. That's the amazing part, is that as close as the series in some ways was, and as competitive as these games were, it was miraculous that the Celtics had Game 2 tied midway through the fourth quarter. It was that was a game. If Miami loses that game, they are sick to their stomachs. That would have been a disastrous, calamitous loss, the way they had dominated. But
back to Doc for a second.
Yep. I thought I might have skated by now.
No. What Kristich did last night raised the question: where was Ned Kristich in the series?
Fair.
It's not like they had a lot of bodies. Big Baby was so bad in this playoff series, and has been really bad since mid-February. And Doc just kept sticking with him. And meanwhile, Kristich is somebody who can hit the 17-footer. He's got nice hands around the basket, which seemed to be the big guy. Always seemed to be open around the rim against this Miami team. I have no idea why he didn't play more in this series.
And as much as a marvel as Joel Anthony was and all the things he does, he is not a player that you need to have a great defensive player against. As good as Jermaine O'Neal was in the series, Jermaine O'Neal really saved the Celtics bacon and allowed them to, to sweep the Knicks and be competitive in these games against Miami. And that was a revelation, his reemergence in the playoffs. But I think I'm not a big fan of the second guess, but the first guess I'll go with. And Max and I did talk about that quite a bit with Kristich as the series is going on, because you want to ride your guys and you believe in a group, and that whole thing that stems from this starting five is never lost that came out of last year, that Doc got a lot of people were kind of ribbing him for that, but there was a real belief about that team and about this group of guys that when they have done something over a period of several years, that they're going to be able to do it. And in retrospect, maybe he did, he obviously did ride Big Baby too long. You don't think a player who's been so inconsistent, you don't expect him to be so consistent one way. And he was consistently bad for a couple of months, which was, it was mental in a lot of ways for him. But you count on a team that has done certain things in the past. And, Big Baby gave the Celtics a chance 2 years ago when they were in a similar spot, outmanned because of the Garnett injury. Yeah. And boy, that 2009 injury to Kevin Garnett, that probably changed NBA history more than anything in this run for the Celtics, this 4 or 5 year run or whatever it's going to be. But Big Baby played so well in a series against Chicago and Orlando, hitting a game-winning shot, playing for Garnett starting, and they almost upset a team. They took a team to 7 games that went to the NBA Finals. So Big Baby had that 2-3 year progression, and then just hit this wall, somewhere around February or March, and never recovered. But it's a fair question that will only, Kristich's performance last night, we don't know if that was a one-shot P.J. Brown thing or not. That was the name I said when Kristich hit that shot that put them up by 6. P.J. Brown just popped into my head. I'm sure it popped into LeBron's head, too.
And the other one is I just felt like Jeff Green should have played more, because you could feel him getting his sea legs in games 2 and game 3. Thought he did a nice job of at least making LeBron work for the shots that he was getting. Seemed like when they posted him up against the James Jones, Mike Miller types, there was always good shots and good plays coming out of that. And last night, I really wanted them to play West and Ray, Pierce and Jeff Green, and either KG or Jermaine. I wanted to see that lineup. That was the lineup I felt like gave Miami the most trouble, and we just didn't see it. I mean, it's water under the bridge. Miami was going to win that series anyway, but when you think like they got Jeff Green for the future as much as the present, And once Rondo's elbow goes out, you have Big Baby, who's a free agent next year. Don't you want to see what you have with Jeff Green for more than 13 minutes a game?
Well, and he ended up, up around 20 minutes a game in the playoffs. And I will say this about Jeff Green, who had some of those good moments you're talking about. But there were a lot of, phrase it nicely, there were a lot of teachable moments for Jeff Green in this series. And there were many times, and Jeff Green's getting some heat today in Boston, fair or unfair, but there were times that he looked like he is going to be the special player a lot of people think he's going to be, and there were other times during this series when he looked completely out of place on that big stage. But Doc Rivers said it in the heat of the moment. It's one of his first answers last night in that post-game news conference. It's getting a lot of attention today, that these are going to be very valuable minutes for Jeff Green because he's going to see what he has on that stage and what he doesn't have on that stage and what he has to have, because there were some just mental lapses, times he didn't close out on LeBron, let him shoot. There were times, the horrendous turnover, obviously late in the game last night. There was a turnover where he simply dropped the ball on a drive to the basket. And the moments that you see the flashes of it that you're talking about, and what's going to separate the Jeff Green right now from the Jeff Green the Celtics hope will be an all-star in the years to come, is the same thing at every professional level, whether it's, a golfer hitting drives or whatever. It's being able to do that every time and knowing that every possession in these games is so critical, because the Celtics had an 11-point lead in Game 4 and a 10-point lead in Game 5, and those leads could have been much bigger had they executed and made those little plays. Instead, they let Miami hang around, which is what teams used to do with the Celtics. They let the Celtics hang around, then the Celtics would run away in the fourth quarter. But that's the difference, and a lot of teachable moments for Jeff Green.
I would have really wanted to see what he had last night. I would have played him 30. Let's see it, because he's a restricted free agent. We don't know what the next cap system's going to be, but there's a chance that this whole hard cap and everything they're talking about might not go into place for a couple of years.
Yeah, it won't.
And there might be, when you think about the teams that have cap space, you might have somebody looking at Jeff Green and saying, I think we can get this guy for 3 years, $30 million, or 3 years, $29 million. I don't think the Celtics are going to match that. And the Celtics really don't totally know what they have with this. If they end up losing Jeff Green and that trade comes down to basically, the 2016 Clippers pick for Perkins, it's one of the worst trades in Celtics history. It really is. There's no way to say anything other than that.
Oh, it's got a chance to go that way. And obviously, again, in a conversation that began talking about ironies, one of the great ones, obviously, is that when people ask about or even try to remember Shaquille O'Neal's tenure as a Celtic, he will actually, ironically, be one of the guys that really cost them, and he cost them by playing so well.
Yeah.
He doesn't play as well as he did, and there's a number, I tweeted this last night, when Shaq played 21 minutes this year, the Celtics were the best team in the NBA. They were 22-4 when he did that, and it was the top five-man plus-minus unit in the first half, up until the end. That the Miami starting five may have caught them at the end. But the top starting five, plus-minus-wise, for most of the year in the NBA was the Celtics starting four with Shaq. And, in the end, what this trade was about was obviously Danny Ainge rolling the dice on the health of Shaquille O'Neal, and it came up snake eyes.
And Jermaine O'Neal.
And Jermaine O'Neal, although Jermaine O'Neal in the playoffs was healthy enough to give them what they needed. It was obviously the Shaq, the injury coming back 5 minutes against Detroit, and that moment in which it very quickly turned to being potentially good news that night when Shaq left the arena in that Detroit game in early April, as if, well, it's only a calf injury, so people weren't as bummed out about it, but that visual of him hobbling off the court, for Celtic fans, that was that gut punch moment of the snapshot that you knew years from now they're going to be showing that.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't really totally ever counting on Shaq. That was the one part of the trade that didn't make sense to me, is that they thought that they could coax a 100-game season out of him. I do wonder, though, if they had any idea how much toughness was going to be compromised with Perkins leaving. And that, to me, is the defining thing of this series, was that Dwayne Wade, by far, was the toughest guy in this series, and he set the tone from Game 1 all the way through Game 5, and we didn't match it. We didn't knock him down. We didn't stand up to him. I just, from watching the Celtics team in 08, 09, and 2010, and then seeing what happened in that series, to me, was the most discouraging thing. They just kind of rolled over from a physical standpoint. I never thought it would happen.
And Celtics fans have to watch almost every day now. There's a new story about Kendrick Perkins taking that leadership role in the Oklahoma locker room and calling team meetings. And even last night, he was unhappy with all those threes they were taking at the end of their Game 5.
Yeah.
So that is, it's all difficult. But again, it's funny to me how listen, it's going to be the defining moment of this season, and the legacy of Danny Ainge and certainly the Celtics era is going to turn on what happens here over the next couple of years, and it's going to be a fascinating time. But for every 100 people that talk about the Kendrick Perkins trade, nobody talks about the decision of Tony Allen to leave, which is the guy who could have made a huge, huge difference. And again, the extraordinary irony of people saying when it happened, you remember, everyone was, wow, Tony Allen giving up a chance to be at a winning team to go, have a bigger role on a team in Memphis. He barely plays at the start of the year, and yet here it is. We're talking on May 12th, and Tony Allen and Memphis are still playing, and the Celtics and the Lakers and the Spurs aren't.
And if he ends up re-signing, which the stories will conflict forever about whose fault it was that he left. The Celtics say they never even got a chance to look at an offer, and he's saying they didn't match it, whatever. But had he stayed, then the Perkins trade doesn't happen, obviously. The other part that I think is interesting is I'm sure that at some point Danny had to look at this, and he had to look at Big Baby versus Perk and made the decision because Big Baby at that point was playing pretty well in mid-February. They could have gotten a swingman for him, I think. I think they could have pulled off something like Big Baby and a number one and Avery Bradley and get Grant Hill or whoever. That's a trade that I think was reasonable. And, they decided that in a way, they decided Baby was more valuable than Perkins. Isn't that fair to say that?
It probably is. There's so many things, the individual things that happen, and we talked last time, a couple of months ago, about the Marquise Daniels injury.
Yeah.
That really, weighing heavily. It's the hardest thing to do in being an NBA general manager and being any general manager is balancing the unprecedented nature of the here and now, which is, with all the coverage and your mind is completely in it, and Marquise Daniels goes down, you got to fill that spot with the bigger picture of the one season and the even bigger picture of the multiple seasons. And talk about a juggling act. That's what you have to do, and what weighs on you at any given time. Not to mention the bigger picture that we also talked about last time, which you can never forget with Danny Ainge watching that Celtics team get old in the 80s and wanting to keep a consistently good team, and rather than the specter of going deep down into the lottery and being a bad team that was not a playoff contending team for the next 3 or 4 years, and him trying to mix going for a championship this year with 2012 and 2013 and 2014 and not letting this thing drop all the way down and keeping it at a consistently high level. It's an extraordinary balancing act, and it looks the way it looks today. History will be the judge. And I know for all the people who listen, there are a lot of people who feel that Danny Ainge cost the Celtics a championship this year. I think that's dramatically overstating it, and I know you like to say, well, if you didn't get the gift of Kevin Garnett and Kevin McHale, but Danny Ainge put a team together that was in complete disarray for the 4 years leading up to that deal to put himself in position to land Kevin Garnett. So if anyone wants to take this championship away, they have to give him the championship in 2008, and at the very worst say, all right, you got us one, you lost us one.
Don't forget the Rudy Gay injury.
Yeah,
because
big.
I think they would have gotten Tony back. I think that's how it was playing out. And if Tony comes back, they keep Perk, and everything's fine. And I don't know if they win the title or not. It's when you see LeBron and Wade play like that last night.
Exactly.
But then you think, all right, our point guard had one arm. We had no center. Mm-hmm. We had Big Baby. Basically, we lost Perkins and Big Baby for that series. Removed both of them, and then cut off Rondo's left arm. And Miami barely beat them in Game 5. So if I'm looking at it as a Miami fan, now you're going against this Chicago team that feels like it's starting to find itself a little bit because they're starting to play Asich more. They're starting to play Gibson more. I think they have their 9 guys now that they know are guys that they can kind of count on this big stage. Everybody's got their sea legs now. It's gonna be a tough team to beat with 2.5 guys. They're gonna need more from James Jones. Miller's gonna have to give them something. You're just not gonna do it. You're not gonna win 2.5 against 9. I just don't think any 2 guys are that good.
Agreed, and all of those things you're saying about the Celtics is the reason that today, which is not a sunny day, 3,000 miles away from you, the sense is that there is sort of a feeling of, okay, Miami was the better team right now, but the Celtics were so banged up and they were so competitive in this series, and whether you want to hear it or not, Doc making the decision to come back and that there isn't going to be any suspense here and that he is going to be a long-term coach of the Celtics, which is what appears is the way it's going to play out. The significance of that cannot be understated in the NBA. Let's put aside X's and O's for a second, and I think Doc Rivers has established himself as one of the elite coaches in that area. Let's talk about recruiting and players in the NBA, in the modern-day NBA, wanting to play in winning environments and wanting to play for certain coaches. And that is a huge moment for the Celtics that I think took a lot of sting out of it last night for a lot of Celtic fans when they start thinking about the future. Now, whatever the chances of, listen, I don't think Dwight Howard is going to be a Celtic, but if you don't think the Celtics' chances of getting a Dwight Howard, of being in the game, are helped by Doc Rivers being the long-term coach of the Celtics, then I don't think people are really paying attention to the way the NBA works now.
And one more thing to follow up on that, because this is really the big question of this whole podcast. Like my editor, Rob King, who I love, he asked me to write, he's like, can you write a thing about the end of the Big Three era? And I actually already have a column that's going up tomorrow, so I didn't want to step on that one. But in my opinion, we're not at the end of the Big Three era. I think maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm a stupid fan, whatever. I totally think this team has one more year left. Everybody is under contract. They're losing Big Baby. They're losing Christich. But from everything I'm reading about how this next economic system is probably going to work, however long the lockout lasts, that hard cap that everybody thought was going to happen next year probably isn't going to happen for a couple years. And if it's a system that's relatively close to this current system, Shaq's gone, Baby's gone, Christich is gone, maybe somebody signs Jeff Green, maybe they sign and trade him, I don't know how that plays out. It's very conceivable that next year's Celtics team will be better than this year's Celtics team.
Which is something I remember saying to you a year ago, that I thought Kevin Garnett would have a bounce-back year and that the Celtics could be better. And let's point out today that the Spurs won 60 games this year.
Yeah.
And it isn't over. And that's what I was saying at the beginning was there was a much greater chance. And I was on SportsCenter with Kevin Grande. He seemed to be thrown this morning when I said this. That there was the Celtics team is a much greater chance of them staying together this year than there was last year after the loss to L.A. when Ray Allen was a free agent. Paul Pierce opted out. Doc Rivers' future as a Celtics coach was far more uncertain a year ago than it is now. That really felt, that 6-hour flight back to Boston after Game 7 a year ago, very memorable day. That really felt like it was the end. And from the beginning of the flight to the end of the flight, I think it may have changed a little bit. And obviously we now have Celtics fans who have romanticized over and over again about the 80s. Got not only one extra year of having the 80s again, having a championship caliber team. They gave them a championship caliber season where they were competing as one of the teams that could win. You could have another one easily next year. Health is going to be an issue. Somebody asked me, well, if there's a short season, boy, because people only can think back to what we know about history. And what if there was a 50-game season? I actually think that hurts the Celtics. It doesn't help them because
no, it hurts them.
It hurts if you're playing 3 games in 3 nights. And that was my first year in the league, and it was completely different from anything.
I actually went and researched that. The number of games everybody played was crazy.
Yeah.
I think it started in mid-February, and they played 50 games in like 9 weeks.
Yeah, it was a 13-week, 50-game season. Essentially, instead of playing 3 games a week, you played 4.
Yeah, that's what
it's funny. It's nice to be old enough that you can remember all this stuff. I was doing the TV games in Minnesota at the time. We signed a player by the name of Hollywood Robinson to a 10-day contract. We got 8 games out of him. It was the worst bargain that any player. It was the worst deal anyone ever signed. He signed a 10-day contract and played 8 games. So it was insane, and that is certainly not going to help an older team. And it's one of the reasons. Statistically, you have that 8-1 upset with the Knicks in '99. That playoff was a strange year because the teams didn't come in 1 through 8, like horses finishing 1 through 8 the way they normally would have.
Yeah.
If there had been an 82-game season.
My prediction is a Jeff Green sign and trade. Shaq retires. I think they either let Big Baby go or just sign him to a 1-year deal. I'm about ready to see him go.
The question is, what does Baby cost himself? A player who, frankly I think he was concerned about it throughout the year. He was concerned about his free agency, and as anyone will tell you, that's the first way. If you're concerned about, slicing the ball into the woods, what are you going to do? You're going to slice it into the woods. And I think it played on his mind as the year went out, and he ended up being so concerned about the free agency that he cost himself a lot of money by the way he played. Yeah,
and I think, obviously Miami will be better, but they're pretty stuck with the contracts they signed last summer. They can really only, we don't even know if there's going to be the free agent exception like there was in previous years, but probably only add a couple of those type of guys. In the Celtics case, a little more flexibility. There's always the Rondo card. Maybe that. If you're thinking about blowing it up, that's the guy.
That is true. There's no question. And are there more? I guess the point is, are there more players at that position that you could replace Rondo with? That's the interesting question. Than there are maybe at the other positions right now. But the East is going to listen. New York is going to be better. Philadelphia is going to be better. It's going to be a very competitive Eastern Conference going forward.
The one team, I think Atlanta, that'll be it for them because I think financially they're going to have to do something with Josh Smith or somebody.
It's shocking to me that Atlanta is still standing.
There was a moment in Game 5 when they were leading at the end of the third quarter, and I was sitting there looking at TV going, are they better? Is that what's happening right now? Are they better than the Bulls? And then the Bulls kind of turned on in the fourth quarter. But I don't think this Atlanta thing is a fluke. Like, they're, for whatever reason, they're just playing out of their minds.
Well, that's playoff. This is a group that's been together. There's continuity. There's certainly playoff experience from 2008, one of the most bizarre statistical series in NBA history. It's funny, I did all this research leading up to what I thought was going to be the end of the season last night about Celtics blowouts in playoffs, and it's one of the third or fourth highest scoring differential the Celtics have ever had in their 87-game series in the history of the franchise. I think it's third on the list is that Atlanta series in 2008, even though it only went, it went to 7 games when it was like a 5-game series disguised as 7. But they've been playing together for a long time. Josh Smith is certainly dangerous. Joe Johnson's a clutch. He's been a clutch player in the past, not against Orlando last year, but they're dangerous enough that you catch Chicago at a time when you can win 62 games. It was an amazing regular season for them, an MVP year, a coach of the year. But the playoffs is a different animal, and you see them sort of feeling that out, especially with Boozer not playing well. And so Atlanta sort of caught it. They've caught teams in Orlando and Chicago having their own internal issues, and they have enough continuity together to look good against those teams.
Hey, one other thing with the Celtics, thinking about next year, I don't think it's far-fetched when you look at what happened with Dallas, how they jumped from one level to another with a similarly old team.
Corey Brewer.
Corey Brewer. Yeah, but I mean, Boubois, who is the guy, the alleged young legs guy, who doesn't even play.
Right.
And then Caron Butler, who is their, small forward, the other guy in the team who could create his own shot other than Dirk, and he's gone. It really doesn't take that much. You never know when Michael Jordan's going to give you Tyson Chandler for nothing.
Yeah, Chandler's been one of the great stories. There's a pretty good coach down there too in Dallas. And you wrote a piece in mid-season about in this unprecedented historical era we're in, where everyone talks about point guards, but the other fascinating thing going on is the longevity of the players that came in. This, with Kevin Garnett and Dirk Nowitzki and Ray Allen and Paul Pierce and that group of guys who've been so good for so long. And look at Jason Terry, who's been good. Obviously, Dirk trying to exercise those ghosts, and Dirk is one of the, he's the man. An MVP caliber year. He's in that top 3 this year for conversation, and it'd be fun to have Dallas win. I think it would be a good story.
I do wonder. You look at Pierce historically. I think he's a guaranteed Hall of Famer now.
Done deal.
He had to go against LeBron. How many playoff games now? At least 20, at least like 19 or 20 playoff games, plus the 4 or 5 times a year. It's kind of unfair for him from a career standpoint. He's just in the same conference with this guy. Imagine if he was on the West Coast, Golden State all these years. He'd probably have another extra season of miles in him.
And, speaking of Miles, there's two things. One, there's actually a great point that comes up with Pierce and LeBron that I'll get to in a second. But we're talking about this 4-year Big Three Celtic era. It actually already has been 5. If the Celtics win this series and go to the conference finals, they will have played another full 82 games in playoffs.
Ugh.
They're in the 70s. Because those 2 years, the 2 years they went to the finals combined, those were 50 playoff games.
Yeah.
Played 14. They played 2 7-game series in 2009. So they were at 70, 75. I think that was the 75th playoff game last night of the new Big Three era. And those aren't just miles. Those are uphill, all-terrain vehicle miles that you put on your tires when you're playing games like that. But Pierce, it's an amazing thing because no one ever talks about him. LeBron can only do right or wrong. LeBron either quits on his team or is the greatest player ever. It's not like anyone's ever defending him. He shoots 30%. Boy, he's terrible. It's not Paul Pierce playing him as well as anybody else has. And here's the thing nobody ever talks about. LeBron James, in his career, preseason, playoffs, regular season, has played 50 games against the Celtics. And that's head-to-head against Paul Pierce every time. So talk about a guy who, as difficult as it is, knows what to do, knows how to guard LeBron. It's like a hitter seeing a pitcher over and over and over again. Eventually, you're going to have some sort of advantage. And we talked to Paul after whatever it was, game to win, game 3, about that. And he kind of agreed. He said, yeah, that does play in. And no one ever mentions that, but they played against each other so many times. And I was thinking, no wonder LeBron, this is such a holiday for him today after finally beating this team that he has had so much struggle with and had to play over and over again so many times from the beginning. You go back, Paul Pierce and LeBron had issues in a preseason game. This is back in 2004, 2005. Did
we ever know what the story was of that? Did it fit into my whole gambling or woman scenario for any feud with NBA players?
No, it did not.
It did not?
But it's a good, it's not. But it's a good, well, it depends on how broadly you're going to extend those circles. But that'll be your next book.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know. Yeah, the Pierce getting the 2 quick fouls last night was the underrated story of that game because.
And you're exactly right.
And because now all of a sudden he can't be next to LeBron on those threes. LeBron knows it. I was really impressed with LeBron in this whole series. I thought he only played one. His game 3 wasn't great, but his passing is as good as it's ever been. When he makes his 3, that's the shot you've given him for the last 8 years. You just hope he doesn't make it. When he makes it, there's nothing else left. And then on top of that, you have Wade, who was the best player of that series. It was a pretty great performance by those guys.
There were 2 Pierce moments in that first quarter where you said, boy, he doesn't have his Game 7 face on. One was the second foul because there was no reason to give it. It was a breakaway.
Yeah,
LeBron was going to score. Now I said LeBron missed a free throw, and I said it doesn't matter. That was the most costly point you're ever going to give up, getting that second foul. And there was a turnover. There was kind of like that reverse English bounce entry into the post that Paul Pierce tried a couple of minutes later, and you just said, boy, this doesn't look like the Hall of Famer Paul Pierce that we saw in Game 3, and what was just an epic performance from him.
So you think Miami wins?
I think that it's hard not to think that today, but obviously you're talking about one-armed, you're talking about the fugitive one-arm Rajon Rondo, the one-arm bandit versus the MVP. Talk about an upgrade. And as I said, with the Celtics going from New York, banged-up New York in the first round, to LeBron, Wade, Miami in the second round, that was, okay, they knocked out Glass Joe in the first round. Now it really starts. For Miami, you're talking about you had to exploit. If you're the Celtics, you thought Rondo was going to destroy and dominate Mike Bibby and Mario Chalmers, and he couldn't because of the injury. And now Derrick Rose. So that obviously changes the complexion of it. They don't have, as we said, Oprah has home court. So Chicago will get the first 2 at home. The beauty of the playoffs, the beauty of this NBA season, which has been my favorite season of the 13 I've been in the league because there have been so many compelling storylines, and even the bad teams have had players you want to watch. It's just been great from beginning to end. The beauty of the second round is almost all of the teams left. Of the 8, 5, 6 maybe, who knows, depending on how you were feeling about Memphis at any one time, maybe even 7, you thought, boy, you can see them winning because there were no more alpha teams. The Celtics and Lakers weren't these super teams anymore.
Yeah.
Every team had flaws. And you look at Miami late in the year, and you look at Boston and say, wow, they got this Shaq thing, that trade didn't work out, and all these different issues they have. How can they possibly win? And yet a lot of people picked them to win the series, and you saw how a bounce here and a bounce there, and they're up 3-2 instead of the season being over. That's how close the margin was between all these teams. That's the beauty of it. So Has any team ever won with an AAU-type setup that Miami has? No, but if ever there's a year in which a team is going to win that never looked like a championship team before, this is it.
I think Oklahoma City has the most talented team. I don't think that means they're going to win the title, but I think they have the most talent. And I didn't hear anybody mention this, but what Westbrook did in the third overtime when everybody was dragging and he was still in fifth gear, I thought was the most incredible athletic display of the playoffs. How are you not tired, Russell Westbrook? Everybody's – and listen, I've done it too. I think he's had some really, really shaky moments and bad decision-making in the playoffs. But, man, when you see that's the only team that I feel like in a series against Miami athletically could just go toe-to-toe and even be better.
They can. It's funny how reputations develop where, Derrick Rose does that all the time. And granted, he's not playing with a Durant, but, Boozer for the most part has been pretty good. He's got Luol Deng. He's got good players he's playing with, but nobody would ever question Derrick Rose. Barkley did a little bit after the one game in which he took over 30 shots or whatever, but
I think
Westbrook, everyone just jumping on Westbrook when he carried that team, whereas Derrick Rose does the same thing. He's the MVP.
The only difference is if Rose had Durant on his team, I don't think he ever shoots 30 times in a game.
No, I'm sure he does. But it's interesting how I'm always fascinated. One of the expressions I despise is perception is reality. Perception is not reality. Perception is perception. We just choose to make it the reality by not really paying attention. And there is some of that. You can see where it's going with Westbrook, and Chris Broussard was on all 29 hits that they make you do when you're in Bristol for the day, and you have to do every single show every 15 minutes, talking about the comparison of Marbury and Garnett in Minnesota. And I think that's a little excessive, but we're still forced to. Yeah, we're forced to kind of label guys. But I think it's pretty interesting, and I have to say, I'll say this in your form, with your audience and your people publicly. You were the one who said at the start of the year you liked Oklahoma to go to the finals, and Cedric Maxwell and I, my partner, we kind of laughed that off. So there's no way they defend well enough. There's no way it's going to happen, and that probably would have been a pretty good association too.
For me, that the overtime game in Game 4. Yeah. Those are the type of games where you need to see it's either a yes or no situation for certain guys. And for me, James Harden passed the test. I now feel comfortable with James Harden in a game like that. He showed me that he had the fearlessness and the fire, and he stepped up a couple times, and it was all the stuff I needed to see. We know Perkins has it. We know Ibaka has it. We know Westbrook and Durant have it. I'll tell you, Nick Collison, even as a bench guy who banging bodies kind of has it. Cephalosha does what he does. Like, they have enough guys to go to war. And, you look at it with the Celtics, and people are looking around, can I trust Jeff Green? Can I trust Kristich? Can I trust down the line? We didn't know who to trust on that team. Oklahoma City has enough guys, I think, to go into a battle.
Well, I'll tell you something you may not, maybe you knew it, maybe you didn't. I don't think it's been said publicly, but Harden was in that conversation.
I've written it once. That was the initial trade.
Yeah, Harden. It was the initial trade, and I didn't know if you had written it or not. It's hard to keep. When you write 5,000 words, who has time?
I think I've mentioned it. I don't think I came out and reported it, but that was the initial trade.
Yeah, Harden was the name that was first. When I first heard about it, it was Harden. It wasn't Jeff Green, and it was kind of an interesting thing at the time. But I realize now, speaking of second guessing, if you're going to second guess the trade, second guess Danny Ainge, and that's all fair, I think let me be the first one to publicly second guess and say at the trade deadline, the association should have traded the Celtics and gone with Perk.
That's interesting. Just send the camera crew with Perkins.
Send the cameras with Perk and just pick up from there. And, and look what would have happened.
That was Presti's finest moment, because I think they went down They went a little bit down the road with Harden and Perkins. And, which surprises a lot of people in the league, because nobody thought Presti would even consider trading Harden. And ultimately he didn't. But that was how it advanced. And at some point he decided Harden must have done something in some game, or maybe he just decided it was a panic trade or wasn't the time yet, pulled out and tried to substitute Green in the trade. And that's what led to Kristich getting involved, and then Nate Robinson and the Clippers pick, and eventually got to where it was. It seemed to me like Danny had his heart set on making a trade, and when that Harden thing fell through, instead of just saying, it fell through, he kind of pushed forward with it. Maybe that's what the danger was there.
Well, he always liked Jeff Green, but the Sam Presti, the thing that ties it all together here on this day, what have we learned? It's these bold strokes. Danny Ainge, trading his entire roster for Kevin Garnett and building up all these pieces. It's Sam Presti, making the move for Kendrick Perkins, extending him. It's LeBron saying, it doesn't matter what's going to happen to me in Cleveland. I'm going to do this and go forward. This is the vision I have, but I can't do it unless I have another star player with me. It's the bold moves that always end up being rewarded, and the ones that you let go, it's the passive things that those are the columns you write years later. They could have had this guy, they could have done this, they could have done that. And bold moves, sometimes, like trading Kendrick Perkins, might come up bad, but it's the guys that make the bold moves that usually end up winning.
My problem with it is that I think there were smarter options, and I don't think they had to make a bold move. And I think they'll come out this summer because Danny's going to have to cover his butt a little bit even more than he had to with this trade, that just expressing real physical long-term concerns about this guy. Even Perkins said it during the playoffs, his knee's at 65%.
Yeah.
And I think, that played a real factor, or that played a real role in this trade, was that, they just didn't know if he was going to be around in 2 years. And they also, if the system didn't really change, which doesn't seem like it's going to, he was probably going to sign somewhere else. They didn't have,
other teams were going to be able to offer him a lot more. There was, obviously Oklahoma was a team that had interest. Houston was going to have interest. I don't think Kendrick Perkins was going to sign here. But again, if you care about your legacy, I don't think Danny Ainge isn't. You don't really care what people are saying about you, but you can't be concerned about the moves that nobody is going to be able to truly judge historically. You have to sort of do them ahead of time.
Did we at least learn that you don't trade your starting center for your seventh man? Can we at least say that we learned that?
You learn that you don't gamble on the oldest player in the league, at 300 some odd pounds.
We learned that.
Hall of Famer that he is. And I have to say, of all the things that were, a remarkable part of NBA history last night to see and to be a part of, and you're just, you're lucky when you get to be a part of it. I was thinking how many people were at both Game 5s that LeBron had last year and last night.
You and Brian Windhorst.
Brian Windhorst. I remember walking, I walked out of the Arena Bowl into the back towards our bus and where we do our TSA, with Shaq, hobbling out. And that was a really sad, what was obviously a tough moment for the Celtics to lose, but you recognize when you're a part of history. I think Doc Rivers and Ray Allen really said that well at the end of the game, and it was a heroic effort by the Celtics to make Miami earn it, all that stuff. But to see Shaq, there's always that one story out of it. Somebody's celebration, it always somebody else's despair, and it was so difficult for such a prideful guy and a Hall of Famer to not be able to play. It killed him.
Well, especially he would have knocked down Wade like 3 times.
Yeah.
That's where they really missed him. It didn't even matter how many points he was going to score. It was just he would have knocked down those guys. He would have been the one guy who stood up for everybody else.
I agree with that, but let's take that one step farther and say the following, knowing what we know. Don't you think Wade would have gotten up?
Yeah, he would have.
Yeah. And that's, of course, it would have been better. Maybe the difference between all those things, Rondo being healthy and Shaq maybe that's the difference between that happening in Game 5 late last night and what we all wanted is if it was going to happen, that it would happen in Game 7. Maybe that was the difference.
Sean Grande, what are you going to do this summer? Just watch wrestling?
I got a lot to catch up on. But that was one of the real benefits of one of the fortuitous things of the schedule is that Raw was in Miami on the off night. So it was The Rock's birthday party, and I got to be. Well, I'll tell you what. You want to talk about television production? You would be impressed with. That is the NBA Finals every night.
Oh, it's amazing
what they do. It is an extraordinary thing to see. I was kind of hoping. Are we going to get you? Is the Stanley Cup Finals going to be enough to get you back to Boston?
I've been watching this whole season. I've watched like eight Bruin regular season games, which is a record for me. Yeah, it's very easy to get attached to this team. I never thought they would make the conference finals.
Yeah, and Tampa, unfortunately, the way Bruins fans, they think everyone thought LeBron was celebrating too much last night. Yeah. Bruins fans now, having survived Montreal, having kicked that 3-0 lead away last year and then survived Philadelphia, now there's the feeling, now they're really involved. Now the bandwagon people are on just in time to face a team that on paper Tampa Bay. What is Tampa Bay? And Tampa Bay's got guys who've been there before. They got a clutch veteran goalie. It's going to
Well,
be
they probably have the best two guys in the series. That
Right.
doesn't help. I hate seeing that.
That does not help.
I will say this. I'm going to make one prediction because I watched probably 8 complete Bruins games and a lot of pieces of other games. I went to the Kings-Bruins game, which actually was a terrible game.
Kings disappointed me this year. I love that goalie.
Yeah, well, they had injuries, though. But, Bergeron got the concussion. I think it's like his 15th. And
yeah, he's up in Eric Lindros's territory.
Yeah, I think that he should probably not play anymore because not good. But anyway, I believe in young Tyler Seguin. I really do. I think he's going to rise to the occasion. I like the stories I'm reading about, even though he was basically left off the playoff roster, he was still showing up to practice. He was working hard. He was throwing himself into everything. I think he's going to rise to the occasion. I believe in talent. I think he's going to have his James Harden moment.
Whatever market you're in around the country, around the world.
Nobody cares?
No. Well, probably. But there's the correlation to be made. Hey, listen, if they've hung around this long, then they might have some interest in that. When a team that is not the primary sport in the city, when the Celtics got good again, there was that feeling after being so Red Sox Patriot-centric in Boston for so long, there was that feeling that you're tasting something else on your plate.
Yeah.
You've been eating the same thing over and over again. Wow, I like this. This is good. I haven't had this in a while. Cleanses your palate. Well, it's been 19 years since the Bruins were in the conference finals and one of the true hockey markets in the United States, and that's something that, the NHL, lest we amble into an hour-long NHL podcast, the NHL, one of the many things it has to correct, in addition to the TV deal, which they did not correct this year, is to get the teams out of the cities in the United States that won't support it and move it back to Canada, where they have buildings and cities ready in Winnipeg, in Quebec. There should be a team in Saskatchewan. There should be, and it doesn't matter what the name of the team is on front of it. It's Columbus or Edmonton. People want to see hockey. And you bring the game back to Canada and create a better balance of U.S. and Canadian teams. The league will be stronger. It'll be more exciting. The TV ratings aren't going to get worse if it's Columbus or, Regina, Saskatchewan. It doesn't matter. But the product is great. In a market like Boston, they took the Fenway game a little bit. That got some people back last year. And now that all eyes, with the Red Sox struggling and the Celtics out, will be on these games in the conference finals, it's a chance for these are the kind of things the NHL desperately needs.
Well, I'll tell you,
everybody be watching Monday Night Raw.
I'll tell you another thing, because the Bruins, some of the diehard Bruins fan gets mad when I watch the playoff games because they feel like I gave up on the team. First of all, I love the Bruins as much as I love the other 3 teams all the way through college. I have the same memories for the Bruins as I have for every other team, except for that I actually went to some of the big Celtic games. The reason I stopped rooting for the Bruins was because of the owner, because he wouldn't spend money. But when you think about it, post-lockout, with this hard cap that they have in place, the owner no longer matters.
Right.
It's not like you can point at your owner and say, you're screwing us over, you're not doing what you need to do. Everybody has a relatively equal playing field. And over anything else, that's why I've kind of gotten back into the Bruins, because I don't feel like I'm going to be led down this road where the owner kicks me in the teeth at the end. The other reason is that hockey is more fun to watch than it was 15 years ago. They made a lot of the necessary changes.
Exactly right. The NHL product is great now, but they scared so many people away between you have lost. Forget the expansion, the influx of European players, and that lot too many teams and hard to follow. When you made the decision to take the money and leave ESPN, you lost a generation of potential hockey fans the way baseball lost a generation by starting all those World Series games at 8:30 and 9 o'clock at night. You lost a generation. Now, ESPN is probably going to have more competition, and that competition could potentially be stronger in the next few years, which will actually be a good thing for sports than it was. But you have lost. Listen, there isn't a lot of time during the NBA season to watch hockey, but if you're traveling like I do and you're in hotels in Miami, as I've been for the last few days, there's no versus in the hotel.
I know. I noticed that I had 2 trips where, there was one Bruins game where I had to, forget where I was, but I had 50 hotel channels, and it wasn't on there.
Yeah, I spent the day in Bristol a couple of weeks ago, which is fascinating to be on that campus. And you realize, Barry Melrose is a buddy of mine, and he is the face of the National Hockey League in the United States because because it is ESPN. Everything starts there, and the NHL by losing its presence. And I get people, and they'll tweet me all the time and say, well, how can ESPN doesn't care about the NHL. That's because the games aren't on there. You can't expect ESPN to ESPN gives the NHL a ton of coverage. And there are people in that campus, in that building, who live and die for the NHL.
Well, and also
them to not have it.
The playoffs have been really good. Like, for instance, the Detroit Game 6 a couple nights ago was going basically head-to-head with Chicago-Atlanta. And I'm a diehard basketball guy. I wasn't in the cave with the multiple TVs. I was with my kids, so I only had the one game on. I ended up watching the Red Wings game. It was an awesome game. The third period was one of the best third periods of hockey I've watched probably in 10 years. And
putting aside the notion of just the content of the game, and obviously hockey is like Spinal Tap. It goes to 11 with that overtime.
Yeah.
None of the other sports obviously will have that. So that's pretty significant. But when the National Hockey League gets down to this point, you can get so into the game, so passionate about it, they can just draw you in. Overtime doesn't have TV commercials, and all of a sudden you are just glued to it, and that's how you build a fan base.
Well, it also ties in more to what's happened in this decade, because in hockey, the fellas take care of business. It's not like the NBA, which is the biggest flaw with the NBA right now, is the double technicals and the refs jumping in at all times, and it's very soccer mommy. And with hockey, you can settle stuff. Oh, that guy cheap shotted our best player in the last game. I'm going to go over. I'm going to start a fight with him. I'm going to beat him up. And it's kind of fits into a lot of the other stuff that's happened in our society right now. Just hockey makes more sense in 2011 than I think it did in the past.
Probably does. And, less predictable with home court, home ice. Home court makes it so predictable. There's a reason that all the 3-0 comebacks in history, except for the Red Sox, there's a reason they've all been in the NHL.
Yeah.
It's because home ice is not the same thing. I'm pretty sure, as I kind of turn my attention to it a little bit, that the road team has won more games in the Stanley Cup playoffs than the home team has. And that idea of just getting to the tournament, it's like the NCAA tournament in basketball. You just got to get to the tournament, and then almost anything can happen. And that's beautiful. Basketball, one of the beauties of the NBA playoffs this year is that the NBA, generally speaking, not generally speaking, it is far and away the most predictable of the four major sports. But you've lost an element of that this year because of there being more parity and this changing of the guard thing that's going on, and that has been a help. That's something the NHL has every year.
The other thing with the Bruins, and then we'll wrap this up, haven't won the Cup since 72, and I look at somebody like my dad.
Yeah.
This is the last big title for my dad. He got 2 Red Sox titles that he never thought he was going to get. He got 3 Patriots Super Bowls that he never thought he was going to get. He got the comeback Celtics title he never thought he was going to get. And now it's the Bruins. And, the Boston fans, you could call us tortured to some degree, but post-2004 certainly doesn't apply. The Bruins, the diehard Bruins fans, they've had a 40-year run that ranks among close to anybody outside of the top 6 most tortured teams. Like, it's not on the Vikings-Bills level. But if you add everything up, some really bad memories, some bad breaks, like losing Neely in his prime, only getting, 8 years out of Bobby Orr, basically, and so there's so much history in place with this that it's hard not to get caught up with it.
I grew up as a Ranger fan in New York, and even in the times, I was tortured in my childhood by the Islanders winning every year. And even at that time, in the late 70s into the early 80s, Islander fans would chant 1940 because it seemed like forever since it had been 39, 40 years since the Rangers had won the Cup.
This has been longer.
It's 39 years for the Bruins.
You're right.
And nobody chants 1972. But I was very, again, you have to be lucky with time and situation and certain jobs. I happened to be, I was very young, I was a ringside reporter for NHL Radio. I was on the ice in Detroit when they won the Cup in 97. And that city and that building that night when they ended their long drought, it's an extraordinary thing to be a part of. And it would be, Boston will go absolutely berserk for a truly unexpected championship because as good as the Bruins have been the last few years, everybody's just waiting for the other shoe to drop.
And whether or not it's the most popular sport, obviously it's not in Boston, but there's no better parade with the Cup. It's the number one of the 4 parades you're going to have. People pouring things in it, drinking from it.
It's the best trophy and the stories of it going around. And, if that ever happened to the Larry O'Brien trophy, do you think we ever would have gotten it back?
Right. I'd be very surprised if they won 8 more times. It just feels like, you start looking at these other teams that are left, and it's like, oh, they have this guy. Ooh,
Vancouver's been the best team all year, and it's funny because scoring differential, people are just starting to pay attention to it in the NBA. Geek stats are starting to really make their way in, And that isn't even so much of a geek stat. It's a great indicator of dominance. Nobody ever talks about it in the NHL. But, again, not 100% sure. I'm sure people will tweet me or tweet you or complain if I have it wrong. But I'm not. I think Vancouver and Boston might have been the top two scoring differential teams in the NHL all year. The Bruins were very good in that category, and you don't see it. There's a much bigger disparity between record and scoring differential in the NHL because of the ties and the overtime losses and things like that. But Vancouver was the best team in that category, and Boston was very, very good all year. So if they were the two best teams over 82, that'd be good for the league too.
Well, my hope is
people
that
in Boston would get to go to Vancouver, which is the best city we ever had in the NBA.
Hey, what a great series. When you throw in the tortured histories and then you also throw in, that has to be the single longest flight you can have in professional sports.
And
what is that, like 15 hours?
And it is a 2-2-1-1-1 in the Stanley Cup Finals.
Ooh.
So in 1994, when the Rangers were about to close out Vancouver, they were up 3-1. They came back from 3-0 down to tie the game at 3, and then they lost. Everybody in the traveling party, all the media, they all just completely, the breath came out of them because they knew they had to fly 3,000 miles back from New York to Vancouver to do Game 6, and then it's like the old NBA Finals with the Celtics and the Lakers having to go 3,000 miles in between games, and they had to come all the way back for Game 7.
Well, here's my big hope, and this is something I think the Bruins fans can rest their hat on. What team is better? What matchup is the best possible matchup if you're the NHL? It's either Boston and Detroit or Boston and Vancouver. So the worst possible matchup is Tampa Bay against anybody.
Yeah, they had Tampa
Maybe
Bay
we'll get some
Calgary
calls.
in the finals in 2004, and that in the United States didn't exist. I happened to be in Alberta for some of that, and it was every page of the newspaper, every minute of every day was about the Stanley Cup Finals. And I came back into the States in the middle of those Stanley Cup Finals, and you couldn't. It was like trying to find WNBA scores in the agatype of the paper.
Boston, Vancouver, or Boston, Detroit is a huge win for the NHL, and I hope that they tell the refs to referee accordingly. That's how we're going to leave it, Sean Grande. All right, enjoy the summer.
You don't want Dick Bavetta for?
Can Dick Bavetta skate? Can Bennett Salvatore skate?
I wonder if Dick Bavetta could beat Charles Barkley in an ice skating.
Sean Grande, we will talk to you down the road. Maybe if something major in the wrestling world happens, we'll call you back.
There's a lot of people. I get that all the time about, hey, when are you guys doing your long-awaited wrestling podcast? But
oh, yeah. Well, maybe we'll have to figure that. Maybe we'll do we should come up with some sort of weird format for that, like our top 20 wrestlers ever or something.
Why don't you just invent another website for it?
Okay, I'll do that. Let me work on that. All right. Thanks, Sean Grande.
All right, man.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.